Eddie. Say hi to Eddie. That's great. We're going to go up and greet the other panelists. So come along with us.
So welcome everybody. We're delighted to have you here today to see this fabulous exhibition and to hear from our expert panel who have all known Helen over many, many years, and they'll each tell you how their relationship has blossomed. We have, of course, our star, Helen Ray. We're delighted to have the show. Helen had the flu, so she missed her party. So this is sort of making up for that. We're so pleased to have her. We have Paige Wery, who is the director of the Tierra del Sol Gallery, as you know, and she's the one who did the first solo show for Helen. A co-curator of this exhibition with Rebecca Hamm. Arts at Tierra del Sol, and before that, as we all know, First Street Gallery for 30 years. So we're celebrating, part of this exhibition is celebrating 30 years, which is fabulous. And then we have David Pagel, who is an art historian, art critic, and art theorist at the Claremont Graduate University. So we're just happy to have you talk about Helen, and we'll entertain questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for coming today. We really appreciate it. And after that little introduction for all of us, what I wanted to do is to start out with just how each one of us was introduced to Helen and her work, because we have different experiences, but yeah, so let's start out with you, Rebecca, and tell us what happened when you first met Helen and how you first met her.
Yeah, thank you. I have some notes because Helen has such a rich history. There's a few things I wanted to not miss, so forgive me if I look at them once in a while. But I was introduced to Tierra del Sol's First Street Gallery Art Center at the very first month of 1990 as a guest artist in the printmaking project that Michael Woodcock designed. And so I was working in that project, and a couple days later they invited me to be a full-time art instructor. So almost simultaneously, Helen walked in the door and joined our program. And to my delight, that's how I began my relationship with Helen, and I am just thrilled to know how much influence she has brought to so many people, as well as just been a joy for my own experiences as well. So it's been since 1990.
And so and was it called First Street Gallery when it first started?
First Street Gallery Art Center.
Okay, so that's a branch of Tierra del Sol Foundation. Mm-hmm. And how many artists did you start with?
We had 8 artists at the original program, and Helen started to build that as well. I mean, she was part of that 8.
Right, which is amazing.
Yeah.
And how many instructors, we now call them mentors, like people that work with the artists, but how many mentors were there per
There
art?
was a ceramic instructor, there was a painting instructor, there was the printmaker, Michael, ... We were very small, and as a nonprofit, we had a director and a clinical person. So it was just a handful of people at that time, which we tend to still keep that theory in all of our programming. Handful of people.
That's so fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay, David, how did you meet Helen?
I met Helen through her work, and I met Helen's work through Rebecca. Rebecca graduated from CGU before I started teaching there. Yeah. And I don't know the exact time and place, or if I just showed up at First Street, or if you sent a message and said, come on over here, we have great stuff going on. And I went over and was just blown away by the intensity and the focus of all the artists there. And to me, what I loved about what was going on at First Street was that to me, the artists were in it for all the right reasons, that none of them were there to get attention or fame or be cool or be trendy or show that they were smarter than someone else. And I teach in a graduate program, and there's a lot of posturing that goes on, or there's lots and lots and lots of great stuff that goes on, but there's still this kind of like, I'm cooler than you are. I want to show that and let you know. And the artists at First Street were just like so into what I loved about art, and it was so radically different in a way from Claremont's program, where every single artist gets their own studio, and they have lots of space and lots of privacy to mull over like dark blue or light blue in the painting. And then at First Street, there'd be tables like this lined up with artists shoulder to shoulder, 6 hours a day, just working, perfectly happy to have that much room to do their thing. And the results were fantastic. And I would keep going back little by little, and probably saw Helen's work the first time, and then I saw it the second time, and saw it the third time, and then eventually organized a show at CGU where I wanted to put artists from First Street together with artists from CGU, and not distinguish like, oh, this is work by developmentally disabled artists, and this work is by MFA candidates. To me, it's just art, and that was one of the greatest joys of being a curator at CGU. And part of it was Helen came to the opening, and it was just like, her face just articulated this deep thrill of having her work in this space and having other people looking at it, and people just talked about the work, and I love that. And I've had a few occasions. I also did I write about her work?
Yes, you did. In the LA Times.
Yeah, and I
in
think,
the
and again,
Japanese magazine.
and I treated it just as art. I never would go, like, oh, this is going to tell the story of the artist's life. I just like, here's someone who made something as a critic. When I go to the other galleries, I just talk about what's there. So that's how I treated Helen's. And to me, the work is just fantastic and sophisticated, and that's why I'm drawn to it.
Right. The way that I met Helen was I had my own commercial gallery in Los Angeles, which I ran for 5 years, called the Good Luck Gallery. And a woman, the gallery manager, somebody that I worked with, Gina Stepaniuk, she had graduated from Claremont, and she kept telling me to go out and check out First Street. Mm-hmm. And so my focus at the gallery was self-taught and outsider and art brut and folk, and that wasn't being shown in Los Angeles proper. And so I finally got in the car and made that hour-long drive, and I had no idea what I was walking into. I had never been into a program, anything like this before in my life. And I walked in with an attitude like, well, I'm going to help them. I'm going to raise the awareness of their work, and I'm going to give them a group show at this gallery in Los Angeles. And I walked in, and I was completely blown away by the quality of the work. It was amazing and overwhelming, honestly, because there was so much good work everywhere I looked, and there was all these artists working together. And it was also every color of the rainbow working together in this room. It was not the typical white art world vibe going on. And it was all community based, and it was just this beautiful thing. And I felt so overwhelmed trying to curate this show that I took a bunch of pictures of everything that I liked. And then I got home and I looked and I kept looking at these fashion pieces. And I kept looking at these fashion drawings, and then I called the next day, and I'm like, who is this? Because I didn't even take names when I was in there. I was just taking pictures, and I'm like, I'll figure this out later. And so then I called the gallery manager at the time, Seth, and I said, who is this person that I keep falling in love with these pieces? And it was Helen's work. And so I heard her age, which was 76, I believe, at the time, and at that point decided, 76, she had never had a solo show before. She'd been in group shows all over the world, I think, at that point. Like, I think she'd shown quite a bit.
Yeah.
Right, but she had never had a solo show before, so that was decided, and that's how I was first introduced to Helen's work, and came back and then did the deep dive for curating a solo show. And Helen is, when I would go out to the program as well, when I would go out to the studio, Helen is super focused when she's working. And so many times, the first times I would show up, she would be working and she would just shoo me away. And I'm like, whoa, like, she's so focused. But if you show up when it's lunchtime, I know. She's like, what are you doing? I'm working. I'm like, sorry. So, but if it's lunchtime, then she started getting to know me and waving and and then, So that is how I was first introduced to Helen. Rebecca, I wanted to ask you about a little bit about Helen's studio practice, and since you have been working with her in the studio for 30 years, so how did this start?
Yeah.
You know, how do you start with somebody that's never really made work before, and then what are the differences now 30 years later?
So picture the studio, kind of this size, filled with tables and chairs, like David was explaining, with these amazing people, and we're all running around like, what are we doing? Helen came in, and I got to work with Helen right away. So what I knew from her mother is that, who lived in Claremont. Helen grew up on 11th Street, and she had worked with kits like needlepoint or craft kits, but never worked with art materials per se for the sole purpose of making a painting, a drawing, or a sculpture. So Helen came in, and so basically we just started an exploration process. It was basically what turned into like an unveiling or a discovery. It was a exploration of trust building, actually, because Helen Ray was a woman who, she had been quite adept at running her life for 50 years, and here she was coming into a new situation and being asked to do some new things. So basically what we did is we sat down together at a table. I had a piece of paper here, and you'll be Helen, a piece of paper here with a pencil and an object, and I would pick up the pencil and I'd point to this, and I'd do a really quick contour drawing, and then I'd point to her pencil and the object, and Helen picked up the pencil and she was pointing to it, and she quickly did that, and she was done in that amount of time. That was it.
Yeah. Next.
That was it. So that was Helen following instructions. That wasn't Helen making art necessarily. That was Helen like following, like, tie your shoes, do this, do that. So she got that down, and we repeated that, and then I found ways to kind of interrupt the finish process. So slowly we expanded, like, oh, wait a minute, before the pencil hits the table, let's look at another part of the composition and add that. So she was completely adept at drawing and expanding, but it was more about the understanding of this is what it is. This is the process. So she, I don't know, it was a very subtle movement. There wasn't really a marked moment in time that I saw Helen take on, this is my choice making, but a slow drive into it, to where she started to just continue on at different points. So it took a matter of a few months to begin her, again, trust building, because again, a woman of 50 years, imagine being guided, provided for, taken care of for 50 years, and then you're asked to make all kinds of new decisions, and then trust a system that will support you to continue on with those decisions. So that's a big piece to build trust for. So at the same time, she was walking around the studio and checking out what the other artists were doing too. So there was a good examination that, oh, other people are kind of doing this, and looking at different materials, different source materials. We would go outside to draw, inside to draw. We did ceramics, the whole gamut. She explored, but I can tell you that at every turn, her skill level was like, boom, she was right there. All she needed to do was have the light turn on for that, as far as it's okay to do. And I just think it's an amazing process that she found this lovely expression of through this media. I'm reminded of a story her brother recently just told me about when Helen discovered American Sign Language, and how he had felt that Helen had really kept to herself, didn't interact with people. But when she learned as a young woman American Sign Language, the world opened up for her, and she began to be able to be more self-expressive. And I just think of that with the art materials, because she came in, again, very perfunctory, like, I'll do this, I'll follow your instructions. And then it became a vehicle of choice making, and she's very clear on letting us know what she wants, by the way, if you haven't noticed that. Like, I want this now. So I think it's an interesting idea to think of how ASL communications compare to art technical material communications, and how that might be a parallel in some people's worlds. But the idea of Helen exploring and showing to us what she could do is what it was about. Nobody taught her how to do anything. It was about a permission to explore and to learn. If anything that she learned from us, it would be okay to make choices on her own.
And so a little bit more technically, how did she start? Because she uses magazines, fashion magazines specifically now as source material to launch. But how long has she been looking at source materials out of magazines, and how long has she been using fashion magazines?
It's a good question. Again, the studio was rich with materials that way. Books, magazines were always available, and drawing from life, doing self-portraits. We have a series of her works where she's looking in a mirror, and the image area is her image in the mirror and everything around the mirror in the composition.
Which she still does. Like even when there's a white border, it's white colored pencils. Nothing is left untouched and unthought through. Really.
Right. Yeah. So she explored quite a wide variety of materials. Pen and ink, where she would just do beautiful contour portraits, different sizes, different shapes. She made beautiful ceramic masks for a period of time. Painting, she explored. She had a blue period, and a monochromatic period, but yeah, the magazines and the imagery was right on. And some of the early choice making was about advertising, and that delighted her audience, mostly me, because she was having she has a wry wit, and I'm even more convinced of that because I met her brother, who's got a quick, very dry humor. And Helen would choose images from popular culture advertising and put them together with words that just, you're like, what? It's just really, really fun. And I see that edginess and perspective of pushing reinvention of the image in all of her works.
David, do you want to, let's talk a little bit about art history and how Helen fits into that. So Helen has, her career has blossomed in front of our eyes quickly. And I'm curious, as an art historian, and I reread the articles that you wrote about Helen today, and they're so good, and you're comparing her to Picasso and all these amazing people. And so why do you, as an art historian, and you look at her work, why is it as popular as it is when there's, it's, how does she fit into art history?
To me, that like an artist's reputation, like Picasso, is one thing, but actually like the works they made is something else. And, it's still like cut paper collage or some colors slammed together. And that's the side of art that I'm drawn to. I don't care so much about the market. I don't care so much about reputations, because a lot of times those can be distorted and overblown, and there's enough other people talking about them. So I just like to go back to the stuff the artist played around with. And when Helen does that, one of the things I'm drawn to is that attentiveness to every square inch of every square centimeter of the paper. To me, she's paying attention to absolutely everything. And to me, there's this really great, in art, it's a figure ground ambiguity. Is like, where does the volume of the figure stop and the empty space around them start? And a long strand of art has been interested in messing with that opposition and kind of blurring the two together. And I think that Helen does that in a way that's just like dizzying and fascinating. And to me, it's a sign of someone paying such close attention to what they're seeing without the armature of that world falling into the place that it usually does. I'm most drawn to those moments in my life when I look out at the world and the things aren't what I expect them to be. They're broken apart. They're fallen apart. They haven't cohered into a whole. They're just like scattered sensation. And then and I think I think Courbet was all about that. I think Cézanne was all about that. I think Picasso was all about that. And I think Helen Ray is all about that. And I just love this kind of like intensity of being in the moment. And then just to me, there's also this willpower of like, damn it, I'm going to make sense of this moment. And to me, there's like a feeling of like, no one else is going to do it for me. I can't rely on advertising to tell the truth. I can't rely on politicians to tell me the truth. I can't rely on any teacher to tell me the truth. I can't even rely on the world to always fall into place. That it's to me, there's this existential nothingness at the beginning of every one of Helen's pieces, and then this kind of like willpower of forcing it together. And I'm in awe of that. So that's what I'm drawn to.
Yeah, I agree. So what I wanted to also do is just kind of give everybody a little line history about Helen's career now and where she is. Maybe you should start out, because I just know from the solo show, which wasn't that long ago. I mean, that was 2015 is when she had her first solo show in Los Angeles, and all the things that have happened to her in these last 5 years is like every artist's dream. So just give us a little bit of a rundown of, and were you prepared? I didn't exactly ask you to prepare for that, but just a little bit of what
Helen, 30 years ago we started, and we moved to Upland a year and a half ago, but the process isn't absolutely no ruffle in her system at all. She continually made work without a hitch to that. But when we started, as I mentioned, I came in on a collaborative project. So Tierra's always had guest artists coming in. So we've had a very rich program that way. So Helen's actually worked with many artists, established artists who come and work with our emerging artists in the studio. So she's had that going on from the beginning. But even in the very first year... Sorry to interrupt,
but can you explain, how does that work for people that don't know? How does Helen work with another MFA student or somebody, how does she work with another artist?
Well, for example, Charles Long and Jane Brucker, and it depends on, when you have a true collaboration, you really have some wonderful visions from each participant, and you come in and you create a third synergy of what's going to happen and some energy. So each of the collaborations have been really different, where sometimes Helen will respond to someone's work, and that person will respond to Helen's work, and they'll make their pieces and show together.
Two separate pieces.
She also worked on fabric and clothing for a show with Jane Brucker. And Jane worked on some drawings that, following suit with Helen's work. So each piece is a little different with each artist. And it just, collaboration isn't, you're not teaching each other, you're actually enriching each other and growing to another level, typically, because that's, Helen has influenced so many artists that way, right? And early on, Mark Chervenka, who was another CGU, he was one of our first founding gallery managers, right from, because I was the gallery manager for a year and then started directing the program. He came in and for 7-8 years founded a really rich gallery program for our artists locally, but also I was telling Paige that we actually were in one of the first iterations of the Outsider Art Fair that I actually forgot about when I looked at my notes from 1996, because we were collaborating with another artist, Kim Crawl Gallery, another gallery, Kim Crawl Gallery Crawl Space in LA. But she's shown early on in a lot of those group shows internationally. She also had been curated in many exhibitions, and in 2012, Daniel Weinberg curated her into the Acme show via some nice connections here. And of course, David, as he mentioned, has curated her in many exhibitions as well, and done such magical writing about her. But from day one, when we opened, we started, that was part of the programming mission, is exhibition, collaboration, community building in the arts, making it real compassionate that way in interactiveness, because we just had a lot of flow with that. So Helen, from the beginning, would always greet artists and maybe work side by side with them. But if anyone, as you were alluding to earlier, if anyone came in and wanted to give their 2 cents or give her a little maybe you should do that, she's very gracious at the beginning. And she'll listen, and she'll, thank you very much. And turns around and goes right
shoo you away.
And then if you come back, it's like, what? Yeah, then you watch out.
And so at the when you first started, when the program was first started, was it about arts careers, or was it about inclusion for people with disabilities into the outside art world, or the contemporary art world outside of your studio? I'm just curious about the shows that Helen was in before The Good Luck. What was your thought? Were you guys just trying to get their work out there?
As much as possible, because the idea of really showing what's possible was the way we took, I think of it as positive subversion, because we were in the era of the ADA coming in, people being forced to have parking places, and everybody was really complaining about the areas of inclusion, curb cuts, all these different things that we have to
And
accommodate
that's over?
to make accessible. Yeah. So, but that wasn't necessarily the mandate, but all of it, like in art, everything has a part of it. Every bit of the community, every part of the interaction of someone's self-development. People being able to make a choice and be honored for that, whereas they typically have been measured up to a standard and said they're below it. A deficit-driven measurement system. And we're all about bring what you have, let's expand from there, like anybody should be. So the idea of that mission tags into people walking into our gallery. We ran it immediately like a professional space. It wasn't like a tag board and come and see the art. It was lit, it was framed, and people would walk in saying, "Ooh, look at these artists." And then they'd discover that the space. So the message was about demonstration and showing how easy it is to bring all of us together, where our folks had been isolated, literally, and we're not that far away from a history of really bad things happening for folks with different abilities, being diagnosed or miscategorized, or somebody that just doesn't speak up for themselves. So I was fascinated. I mean, I'm an artist. I didn't have background in social services or anything. I'm like, oh, let's make art. Look at this art. And that's what we did. We just made it an art studio. We wanted it to be about art and artists and what artists do. Now we have this careers in the arts because we're a bigger agency and we got lots of money and we can write grants. So we're very formal about that now. And the gallery has such a beautiful, beautiful mission that's going on now too. Boy, if you haven't been to the gallery in Chinatown, you gotta go. Gotta go. It's just absolutely amazing. See the website.
Sorry, I don't mean to be rude, but I'm looking for my glasses because I've got notes, but I didn't pull out my glasses. Okay, here we are.
So Helen has been literally the head of that vanguard that this show is all about, because she has naturally, as Helen being Helen Ray, being allowed to be Helen Ray in her full capacities and not limited by what people think she can't do, shakes the world. And that's what we're about. We operate as a support system, a facilitation system for people. The artists run the show.
Absolutely. So let me just give everybody just a brief history of what's happened since Helen had her first solo show. And this is by no means everything that has happened. I'm just going to do a really quick run through. So 2015, the Good Luck Gallery, she had her first solo show at the gallery. I was still a new gallery owner and still trying to trust my gut. I had no idea if her work was going to sell or not. It hadn't had, I asked Seth about how many did they sell before, and she, there weren't tons of sales for Helen before this solo show. And we brought her into the Good Luck Gallery and it sold out. And it was not just a sellout, it was like a frenzy sellout. The prices were pretty low because we had taken just, you have to be really careful on how you price work when you're pulling it out of a studio where things are priced low. So we raised them a little bit and people were arguing over who had seen what first. And I immediately knew that I had priced them too low. But it was a beautiful thing. And I called the studio the next time they were open and I asked, is Helen excited? And they were like, she's just back at work. Yeah. Selling things is not Helen's motivation at all. And so anyway, that was her first solo show. The next year, about 6 months later, the Good Luck Gallery took Helen's work as part of our booth at the Outsider Art Fair. And I didn't know that she had ever been in the Outsider Art Fair before, but when the Good Luck Gallery took her, there was 3 people in my booth and she was one of them. And that is when she got international collectors. So at the Good Luck Gallery, the first show that sold out, it was mostly artists because that's who was coming to my space. And they walked in and there was artwork on the wall that they could actually afford. And it was this amazing inspirational work and nothing like they had ever seen before. And that's why it went. Then when I took her to the New York Outsider Art Fair, that's when she got her international collectors. And a big person that came and bought one piece is Matthew Higgs, and he's the director and curator of White Columns, which is an amazing nonprofit program in New York. So that was Helen's first New York solo. the magical thing about White Columns Gallery is that you can't have had another solo show within New York. It has to be your very first solo show in New York, so it's a launching pad. He doesn't represent artists and continue to work with them. You get one show, he introduces you to all of his people, which is a lot, and then he launches you off. And he's been super supportive of Tierra del Sol program as a whole, and has also given another artist, Michael Lavelle, and you can see his work in the next room, a solo show as well. So that happened, and then she was written about. She started getting written about, and that was from the very beginning. But I mean, the list. This is just a small list, but it's the LA Times, Art Forum, New York Magazine, Vogue. She was on the BBC. She was on KCET, in Vice Magazine, Artillery Magazine, and the list goes on and on. And as you can imagine, her work looks so gorgeous. I mean, it was just like, it just pops out. She's won all kinds of awards. She just recently, in Gallery Magazine, which comes out of New York, they just gave the top 10 artists to keep your eye on, and these top 10 unknown artists to keep your eye on. And Helen was an honorable mention and was in the top 10. And everybody else was like, they looked like they were 25. And so they called me and they were like, Helen Ray made it into the magazine, and I didn't even it had been a year since I had applied for that, and I didn't really remember how much information, I had sent them images, but I'm like, did they read her age? Do they know that, where does she make her work? And there was this gorgeous picture of Helen, and she just, it was an amazing. She got a full spread in the magazine, and a lot of the other people just got little pics, but it was great. And she's also had solo shows now in Paris. So she's had, the Good Luck Gallery took her to the Outsider Art Fair in Paris one year, and from there, some people saw her work, and then she got asked to, the show just came down, and she's just had she's just had a solo show there, and sold a ton of work, and continues to sell. So what I wanted to ask you about art history again, do you feel like people with disabilities and what some people call outsider art and out of the mainstream art world, that it's getting more attention now? Like it feels like that to me. How does it look like to you?
I think that's true, and I think that those categories are breaking down everywhere. That there was a time where people like to put things in their boxes and leave them there. And I think that the last 20 years, the world has just gotten so much more dispersed, so much more open, so many people aware of so many different things going on in different places, that those borders just don't hold up anymore.
Yeah, and from my point of view as a dealer, museums are starting to actually recognize that they put up a lot of borders.
Yes.
And so they're starting to accept collections from collectors that have been
marginalized.
Right, exactly.
And ignored.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think that as far as the higher up collectors that have been buying work, and she literally has people buying her work that are in the top 10 collectors of the world are now buying her work. And so they now know that the museums are going to accept these collections that they've been working on for a long time and that they're putting together. So historically you do feel like the walls are kind of coming down.
Yeah, and I think that I've always had trouble with the term outsider, because to me what bugs me about politics in America now is that there's insiders and outsiders. And as a critic, I've always loved writing for a newspaper, because it's not like writing for a professional publication, a trade publication, that anyone can possibly read it. So I've always been kind of an anti-elitist, and I liked populism before populism got a bad name. But I like the idea that that you didn't have to have a pedigree to do something, and to me, like, if you look at the big picture, and I don't mean to put this lightly, but like, all artists are outsiders. Like I think in American culture, we're not encouraged to become artists. You're encouraged to make money. And I think our culture actually, our nation wasn't founded as a culture. It was founded as a business. And it was like, get rid of images, Protestant work ethic, work, make money, die, and pass it on. And I think that, so to me, there's a large extent, everybody's it. Anyone who dedicates their art to knowing the world more intensely and making it more beautiful doesn't really fit in. So to me, it's a big area of misfit. So in a way, to me, the ones that work the best is just act like they're the center of the universe and do something. So that's kind of my...
The word outsider is definitely controversial, and it has been for quite a while. As a salesperson, it is the word that is used in art fairs, still use it in magazines, still use it, but I am definitely, compared to when I first opened up my gallery and I was kind of desperate to have that conversation with people, now, especially, I mean, Helen's not an outsider at all. She's selling her work all over the world. So I have switched my language as much as possible. And the artists that we work with are contemporary artists.
Right. Yeah.
You know, the ones that are alive that we work with are contemporary artists, and they're making work daily, and there's...
Yeah, and that's how, as a writer, as a critic, that's why I just try to, I want to talk about the art, and not about...
A label.
Which I recognize when I read your articles. There is no mention of disabilities. The word outsider is not. And most people that have written about Helen, it can become the first thing that they're talking about.
Almost always. I mean, it still does. The first paragraph,
right.
And nothing wrong with that, but I don't want to do what everyone else does, so I want to do something different. Like you said, we're just going to treat it as art. And I love that. To me, the great thing about art is that it's this just arena filled with unbelievable possibility and openness, and a lot of times we don't treat it like it is, but I think you were, and it's such a positive thing to do. It's just, it's art, and it's like, go from there, and well, what does that mean? It's like, well,
and historically, you know, the training I got about outsider art, it's a limited time frame in art history.
Right.
It's like the answer to Art Brut in Europe, and it's like over.
So a long time ago, but people are still like.
So it's,
to me,
it's a very interesting use of the term. I mean, I would get resumes for people who'd want to teach, and they say, "Well, I'm an outsider because I disagreed with my professor at college."
It's like you go, girl.
But it's just an interesting word, and it's a lovely conversation to have because it just broadens the thinking about this whole area, and we're all about connections. You know, art is so diversified and wonderful. It's amazing how it inevitably brings us closer together too.
And that's another thing I really love about Helen's work is that no two look alike. Every single one is its own thing. You can tell, I can tell that Helen made that, but she's not one of these artists who works in series where it's like, oh, I set the format, I got the basic composition, and then I did several different palettes, and then I exhausted those possibilities and went on to something else. To me, every single one is unique and distinct, and to me, that's that's one of the things that art can be, and I much prefer to try to give more room to that than the categories things fit into, even in terms of an individual's work, much less outsider or political or whatever the work gets called.
So are there any other things that you guys want to talk about Helen, that you want to share with Helen that I haven't quite covered?
Well, Helen has, again, she's been very unafraid of trying new things. It's just, okay, let me get the pen and ink and do a drawing. Let me work with paint on an inch mark with creating portraiture. Let's do a series after the old masters, because she had an old masters book, and so we had all these Vermeers that came out. They are all gone, folks. Sorry, I don't even know where they went. But she was just so bold and so influential to so many people. And
one of the things that I hear regularly from other artists looking at Helen's work is how there's very few materials being used, and yet the impactfulness that she gets from just colored pencils and she does when she looks at a magazine and she decides what she wants to launch off of, she does a line drawing with a graphite pencil. And then she goes in and she uses colored pencil to fill that in. And that's so, and it's just very clean and straightforward, and it's a remarkably impactful finished piece with
So direct.
such simple materials.
Right.
Yeah, and I hear that a lot from artists, you know, that are in the studios, I'm sure, just like going over and over and over their work.
Rethinking,
and it's like,
double checking.
Right.
She's just really on it. And as you see, every inch is cared for. She works often. She'll be working from a source material. She'll have that there and work, and then the source material turns and this turns, and she'll be. It doesn't. The orientation isn't about, oh, does it look right? You know, it's really about creating the whole composition, the ensemble of contour shapes and colors that just all richly work together. I've always seen her be very powerful in her compositional design and her placement. Even when she was doing the line work of contour, she would do life drawing, contour heads of people posing, and she placed it so provocatively in the picture plane. It was just right on. It'd be like, don't touch it. It's just like, wow.
And some of the work, if she needed more space, she would just take a piece of paper and just tape it on the back and keep on going.
Yeah.
Because she needed more space.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's.
Yeah, really big.
Which we haven't seen that in a while, but yeah, that's it's part of her practice.
And Helen, like I said, she's given us her trust. I think it's you know, it's very precious that she allows us to work with her, and she feels safe in that space. At least she appears to be. But she also takes huge ownership over her artwork. And when she finishes a piece, I have an office near the studios. She brings that piece to my office and puts it on a place on my desk. And I have to immediately look at it and put it in the temporary storage area, or she's not leaving. And then if I'm not there, she comes back. She leaves it on the desk. She comes back and waits for me, and then she absolutely walks me through the process.
Keeps
to
you
put
honest.
it in the proper. Exactly. That's it. She has a lot of ownership, and when she sees a show, I don't know if you were here earlier, she wanted to pose with each piece. And she loves seeing people respond to this. But as you may have had the experience today, she's so gracious, and she will greet and smile and shake the hand of everybody who comes to her shows, and usually wants to know your name, even if she's falling off the chair tired, which she was in New York for her solo show at White Columns. She's just, she's getting there now too. But she started at 50 without prior work experience in the arts, and she is 81 now. She has always been on. She's just, you know.
Did she go to Paris?
She didn't go to Paris.
Next time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, is there anything else before we open it up? Do you have anything you want to?
Up and away.
No? Does anybody have any questions?
Yes. Hi, I'm Stacy Wexler. And I'm curious because I know for myself and for a lot of artists, we go through this kind of rigorous, like, oh, is it good enough? Is it not good enough? I can't stand it, and you toss it all away. Does she ever go through that kind of angst?
The angst. No, I've never seen her throw something out. I've never seen her rip something up. I've never seen her spit at me or the art. It's just a method. It gets done, and she moves on to the next. I love that. We all learn from that.
Yeah, it's an artist's dream to not have art history hanging over your shoulder, to not have, you know, like selling at a show, to go back into your studio, the nerves that you have to go back up to a blank canvas and start over again. Helen doesn't have that stress for her work, which is so amazing. And I think that that's part of, just keeps flowing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it takes, you know, like 1 to 2 weeks for her to do a drawing, and it's so consistently amazing.
And she's actually making them faster now. She's making more work than she ever has. And they're very rich and powerful pieces.
Yeah, they've grown since I first saw her work, where it was more about patterns and design. Now it's really, I see a lot of portraits, just straight portraits, where she's just filling in the background, and it becomes this like super powerful portrait. But I can see, you know, just like any artist, her work expanding and growing.
Yeah. There was a period of time, you talked about expanding, and I'm thinking of time. When she first worked with us, Helen would come and, you know, again, she would do that little drawing and be done. Then she expanded to an hour, and she'd work on a full day on something. But if she started a piece and it wasn't finished by the end of the day, she would miss her bus home.
Wow.
She was not going to leave until the piece was done. And I'd be driving her home a few hours later because she would not leave the piece. She was so dedicated to finishing it, whatever the piece needed to do to be done. Because she developed a process, and whatever stage she was in with the process, there was a completion to it. So as far as the frustration, there was a few times where it was like, no, and she would just like stay at the table and continue to work. And
But now
and-
she's
she's become more flexible.
I know, now she does go home.
She does. She actually grew to leave a piece. We worked with her quite a bit on this, to leave a piece undone and assure her the first thing in the morning she could get it. And the first few months of that, there were some times when she couldn't find it right away, and she wasn't very happy about that. So we
I know
worked
that
that
feeling.
through. The trust again, right? The trust, because you can imagine a life of not necessarily hearing or things changing around you and you're not quite sure. So there was a lot of ownership on like what is going to happen to this. So from the beginning, that shows me that she had a real connection to her work. And again, she doesn't miss a bus now because she's more relaxed about the process.
Yeah, she can trust it now.
Yeah.
So, did you had a question?
Yeah, in hearing you talk about how her ownership over her work, it makes me wonder, did she ever create a piece that she loved so much that she needed to keep it for herself and didn't want to give it up for a gallery or to sell or to put in a show or anything?
That's what I experience. But indeed, Helen, again, I think what I see is her method. She established, at first on she didn't quite have how do you work with this art materials, but then she established a really strong way of working, and that's how she works. So she makes something, it's completed, and it goes in. And she makes another, it's completed, and it goes in. It's not like a machine at all, but it's more this is I get to do the next one, and it's a flow. And again, she's so youthful. And I see that, when she's had these works that are more complex and more dense, she has stuck on this particular method for quite a while now.
Yeah.
And because she would divert, and a lot of that was, we would have different artists come in with like, oh, let's make printmaking, or let's, work with ceramics. Well, she can do all of these things. But she has now just really built her studio space. She loves to get up and see what other people are doing, but she goes right back to doing her thing. And she seems to really feel very comfortable with not needing any extra help or acclaim or, hey, that's great. She likes to say hello to you. But the artwork itself, it's like the next one. She will own a magazine page. For example, she'll come to I'll stop at this, but she has an artwork going with an image from Vogue. She's interpreting that. She might bring those to my office, and then she's like, no, I want the back. So she's like, where's the copier? She gets it on the copier, makes the This blew me away last 3 months ago. Came to my office. I didn't even know she knew I had a copier. She brought the piece to the machine, lifted the lid, put it down. I'm like,
And
okay.
she keeps that?
And I made the copy to put with the piece so we would have a reference, and she took the magazine that had an image on the other side she wanted to draw. So she's clearly making very strong decisions and letting us know everything she needs, the time frame she needs. She owns this. And I went away from that, does she, cling or harbor. It's like, what's that, the core of all suffering is attachment, She's got the Zen thing down really well.
And that's something that working with people outside of the mainstream art, that the dealers we have to be super careful with, because there are people that I met that I loved their work, but they weren't quite ready to let it go. And so you have to work with sensitivity when you're working with artists, and all artists are attached to their work, but Helen does. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not in there ripping them out of her hands. It's like when she's done, she's moving on to the next piece.
She's a very smart, intuitive woman, and she gets this.
Is it signed and dated when it hits your table?
Yeah.
And
It's
is that the
already
last
signed.
moment? Do you know if that happens at the end of the piece?
I think it's at the end. She completes and she signs. Yeah, and you'll notice the titles are typically about a date, and that's literally when she finishes. Mm-hmm. Good question, isn't it?
Yeah. And so what started the process of just working in like monochrome,
Doing that
black
for
and
a
white?
while.
Oh, so that was before this?
She has actually been sporadically doing that for a while, depending on the images that she selects. So because as the curator at the Good Luck, it was sporadic.
Okay.
And this is the first time that as a curator, I put together a nice set of black and white work because this new work was like, whew, like those portraits are just phenomenal. And
The source material is monochromatic.
exactly.
I see, okay.
Exactly.
So, right, okay.
So, and I'm curious also as to what attracts her to the piece that she's going to draw. She's flipping through the magazine and then just like something comes.
Yeah, we have at the beginning part of when she was using magazines, we had so many magazines. We love magazines. We use them for all kinds of things. So we get a lot of donated magazines, and artists are going through them all the time. She gravitated more towards advertising at first, and then went more to the fashion. And then we happen to have a few Vogues around the studio that were available for her to find. So, so she's definitely making that choice by having that available. But she's not going online or things like that. She's using actual print material.
And when she sees something she likes, she rips it out, right?
Uh-huh.
And then that's
She'll go through and like harvest a few at the same time and put them into the portfolio for her continued work.
Her stash for later.
Exactly. She does have a stash. Yeah.
Everyone, what are you talking about?
Stash is source.
I need that
New
black
question?
one. I want to get a picture.
Yeah, you brought up a question I've had for a long, long time and never had anyone to ask about it. And that is the categorization of outsider art. I get a magazine that's Slotkin, I think, you probably are aware of it. People put their stuff in it, and I don't know. I went to Baltimore and someone said, oh, you've got to go to the Outsider Art Museum there. So I went, and then there's the disabled, you know, and then there's Helen's work. I see it everywhere. So I'm confused, and I don't know what to make of it. It's obviously the use of the term applied to anybody who didn't have any experience in art. So I get all kinds of images based on that understanding. Black people. I noticed that your gallery has many people of color, and I mean, I was taken aback by it. Wow, I thought, wow, here's
I can see how you might be confused about the term outsider because it's used all over the place. It's really, we were talking earlier about the definitions being like, there's no hard edge to those terms and where people use them. There's the outsider art fair, there's the outsider museums, there's Art Brut, there's contemporary artists. So I think what the best thing to do is just purely be in the moment with the art you see and see it for the value it has. And again, the way that we all have a creative voice, and the people that I've been honored to work with have been limited in being exposed to using materials or being honored for exploring their own creative voice in history. Now it's becoming much more accessible for all people.
Okay, I have two things that I'd like to share with you. I bought, I was a teacher, so I never have had a lot of money, but I'm really into art, which is terrible. And I found that I could buy a piece of black art because it was cheaper. And I may like it, but I did that with my grandchildren. So I have 7 of them. I bought like lots and lots of black artists.
You know, I think what you're also alluding to is the history of how people have discovered art and the way that sometimes people who don't have access to the gallery system, there's a bridge that's made by different gallerists. And sometimes we'll see how folk artists are introduced to the system. And there's much more people who are involved now in egalitarian practices and honoring.
Very interesting.
And I'm going to ask if I can ask Paige a question really quick, okay?
Okay.
So I was going to say Paige's gallery has been such a great eye for connecting to the contemporary artists that are working, and the idea of looking at people who are making from all different places and with different reasons for making that. And you've brought that together in such a powerful way through the Good Luck Gallery.
Yeah,
And now
and
through
it was
Tierra.
not an intentional thing to be as diverse as it was. That just happened naturally. I mean, I'm looking at people that didn't go to art school, and I'm going, you know, all across the country and looking for underrepresented artists, and, you know, lo and behold, it's people of color, and it's, you know, people that are outside the mainstream art world, and all of that is changing. And, you know, and so the word, like we said earlier, the word outsider really is controversial, and a lot of people find it very offensive, and I use it much less than I used to, but I still do use it every once in a while because it is the most widest term, and my job is, you know, selling work. I'm an art dealer, and but also, like I said, when I walked into First Street Gallery, I completely recognized the beauty of walking in there and seeing all different people of, you know, just making work and making work together.
And you
And
saw individuals. Every artist was their own
right,
vision,
but also
yeah.
working as,
Yeah.
you know, working and getting along, and
Yeah.
it was just like,
Yeah.
wow, this
Amazing.
is so exciting. And if you haven't been to the studios, please go see the studios. It's just over, they've moved over to Upland now, which is a 10-minute drive. You guys probably all know where Upland was. I had never heard of it before. But please go to the studio.
It's absolutely magical.
It
It's
is.
just like you're just walking in this place like, wow, creativity is happening
Just
here.
flowing out.
times
It's just
10.
flowing.
Yes,
And
There has to be a way, we need some cards or something with an address on it.
I think that we
Yeah,
have
I'll make sure you
some-
have that. I have
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
Good.
Good. Yeah.
I promise I will.
Yeah, it's a good experience.
Now
for
my
sure.
grandchildren are older, and it's really hard to explain to them that I was cheap.
Well, hopefully people buy work because they love the work, and if there is something that, I mean, most people don't feel that comfortable going up to an art dealer and saying, I actually can't afford this piece of art. Can I get a discount? Can I put, you know, different? Can I make payments? Do not be scared to do that.
Trades?
Because trades don't happen with a dealer. That's to another artist. That's a different conversation. But yeah, so. But definitely, if you're looking for works to buy, hopefully you're buying not just because of the price, but because you love it, and because it's a responsibility to buy an original piece of art. That is a one-of-a-kind
Yes.
thing that
It
you
is.
are responsible for, and yeah, and it gets passed down, like you said, which is exciting. So do we have?
Amazing house.
Oh, cool! I love it. So we just have a couple more minutes. Does anybody? Yes. Well,
This is a real novice question, but is there a type of pencil that Helen likes to use?
Not a novice question. Artists are better by stealing ideas from other artists, for sure. Prisma pencil is a highly, it's a highly pigmented pencil, and the clay is you know, the color that holds together is with like a clay base. Prisma is the name of the brand, and that's Helen's pencil of choice.
it's
a
yeah,
good
it's the
one.
top of the line
Yeah.
colored pencil.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's something that the studio is dedicated to, which is the paper is good quality, the paint is good quality, it's whatever the artist wants, and those pencils have the best color.
One more question, since we're talking about Helen's art, and you mentioned resource material. So does she use a singular image when she starts drawing, or is it a kind of a collective of images, so it becomes like a more
It's entirety of the page. It's not a collage. She's not bringing a past experience into that. Again, as David was talking so succinctly about that idea of being in the moment, this is like all about right now, and where's it going to go? I love that how you said that. Can you say that again?
The video's got it.
Oh, yeah.
She did. I will say that this last batch that came to me, there is some words that she added that were from other images that were not on the original. So it's something, yeah. And I
Were
have
they the same spread though?
no.
No.
Yeah, it's somebody's name that is actually the editor of W Magazine, and she put it on a Vogue, and it was, yeah.
That's neat.
Yeah, it's the first time I've noticed, and I pour over the source material. Some people like to see the source material, some people don't, but there's more and more changes happening to the imagery of what she's doing.
I love
So
Helen continues to evolve.
absolutely, 100%. So thank you, Helen, and thank you guys for joining me, and thank you to the Claremont Museum and everybody that helped put this together.
It's just been our joy to have this exhibition. We were so happy that it came together, and one of our board members, Ryan Zimmerman, was the one that spoke up. You know, I can honestly say a younger point of view that said, "Hey, have you guys seen Helen's work?" And we just and then Rebecca picked it up, and Paige came on board, and it just came together so beautifully. So we're delighted to have you here. We're delighted that you know where we are. We're a bit under construction, but that pay no attention. That's just seismic work. In time, we will have 2 more galleries. So you know it's a historical building. You know, we have to build a shell in order to hang something on the wall. But we're delighted you're here. We'd love you as members. Come back. And we're providing lots of tours for Tierra del Sol artists. So that's been another wonderful outcome of this exhibition. Thank you so much. Thank you.